What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Can I remind members of the COVID-related measures that are in place and that face coverings should be worn when moving around the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus? The first item of business is consideration of Business Motion 3453 in the name of George Adam on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out revisions to today's business. And I call on George Adam to move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And moved.
Thank you, Minister. No member wishes to speak on the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 3453 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is general questions. In order to get in as many people as possible, I would be grateful for short and succinct questions and responses. And at question number 1, I call Gordon MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has in place to support World Book Day on the 3rd of March 2022.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Today is the 25th World Book Day, which seeks to encourage children to explore the pleasure of books and reading. The Scottish Government supports the activity of the Scottish Book Trust, who are today promoting a range of activity to encourage a love of reading. Literacy is foundational to every child's education, and reading is a fundamental skill for life, as well as a source of lifelong pleasure for many. To help young people develop these skills, Scottish Book Trust deliver the First Minister's Reading Challenge, the Reading Schools programme and Read, Write, Count. Each initiative aims to positively impact on pupils' attainment by building and embedding reading cultures in schools at home and in the community to support and nurture a love of reading for pleasure.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for that answer. To celebrate World Book Day, many of the schools and nurseries across my constituency of Edinburgh Pentlands are encouraging their pupils to dress up as their favourite book character. I know many young people will be excited to take part in World Book Year this year, given the impact of the pandemic on previous year's celebrations. With the Scottish Government-funded BookBug programme also collaborating with World Book Day, will the Minister commit to continue to support the BookBug programme, which has proven to provide a range of positive benefits for children and families across the country?
Minister.
Well, let me first of all recognise the excitement of many children taking part today, and not just in Mr MacDonald's constituency, but across all in the country, including my own. My son went off to school today in his pyjamas, in line with his school's bedtime story theme to recognise the day. Initiatives like BookBug help encourage an early love of books among children, while also providing great opportunities for parents and their young ones to spend time together playing, having fun and learning. In this financial year, we provided £1.66 million of funding to the Scottish Book Trust Early Years programme. It provides a range of 3 book packs for every child in Scotland from birth to primary 1 to support the day this year. The Scottish Book Trust are working in partnership with World Book Day to distribute vouchers to 2,800 LE settings in Scotland alongside their Explorer resource kits, distribute World Book Day digital vouchers to family who receive extra support through BookBug for the Home. They'll also send copies of World Book Day books to a further 3,000 families via BookBug for the Home after today. Discussions with the Scottish Book Trust to grant fund the early years programme in BookBug in 22-23 are currently underway.
Thank you. Question number 2, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many households are waiting for social housing in central Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
The latest data suggests an estimated 80,000 households across the 16 local authorities in central Scotland in 2019 were on a housing list or had applied for social housing in the previous 12 months. However, we know this figure will include households who are already living in a social home, as well as households looking to access the social sector. Ensuring that everyone has a warm, affordable home that meets their needs is a priority for this Government, and that's why we are committed to delivering 110,000 new affordable homes by 2032.
Mark Griffin.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and just ask the Cabinet Secretary if she is aware of changes to the system of long-term empty or second homes in Wales, and to ask if the Scottish Government have considered giving local authorities in Central Scotland powers to implement a similar scheme which could reduce the number of long-term empty homes and raise additional funds to build social housing and reduce the number of families waiting for a home.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think I caught most of that. I mean, tackling empty homes is a priority for the Scottish Government, and we've set out a range of actions in Housing to 2040 to help make better use of this essentially wasted resource. We continue to invest in the successful Scottish Empty Homes Partnership approach, which has brought more than 6,000 homes back into use since 2010. Of course, we'll look at ideas that are brought forward in other places, and happy to look at what Wales are doing. But we have existing measures, including, for example, the additional dwelling supplement that second home buyers pay, short-term let control areas for secondary letting, and also existing powers that local authorities have to vary or remove council tax discount on second homes. So we're already taking a lot of action, but obviously happy to look at any other ideas that Mark Griffin or anyone else might want to bring forward.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise the Chamber how many council houses have been built in central Scotland under the SNP, and how many were built from 1999 to 2007 under Labour and the Liberal Democrats?
Cabinet Secretary.
In the Central Scotland constituency region, which includes Falkirk, North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire local authority areas, published official statistics on local authority new build homes show that there were only 30 council homes built between 1999, 2000 and 2006-07, compared to 1,792 council homes built between 2007-08 and 2020-21. Since 2007, this Government has delivered 105,755 affordable homes across Scotland, over 73,000 of which were for social rent, including nearly 17,000 council homes. I would have thought that's something everyone in the Chamber would welcome.
Question number 3, Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recent PricewaterhouseCoopers report showing that Scotland lost, on average, 4 shops a day in 2021.
Minister Tom Arthur.
We know that retail businesses have been faced incredibly difficult trading conditions in the last 2 years as a result of the global pandemic. That is why, since the start of the pandemic, businesses have benefited from £4.5 billion in support, and our non-domestic rates relief have saved businesses, including retailers, around £1.6 billion. Last week, we announced an £80 million COVID Economic Recovery Fund for local authorities and allocated a further £3 million to the City Centre Recovery Fund to support local economies to recover. And our £10 million Scotland Loves Local programme and City Centre Recovery Task Force are supporting local communities and retail businesses in our towns and cities to rebuild our high streets. Our 10-year National Strategy for Economic Transformation, combined with the upcoming Retail Strategy and Town Centre Action Plan, will strengthen the retail sector and ensure Scotland maximises its economic potential, becoming fairer, wealthier and greener.
Dean Lockhart.
I thank the Minister for that reply, but it doesn't go far enough. The PwC report also shows that the number of shops across Scotland's high street has declined in each of the last 6 years, well before COVID, the worst performance across the UK. The Scottish Government has said that it would publish its long-awaited retail strategy last year, but we still haven't seen it. The Scottish Retail Consortium has called for a long-term, coherent approach towards the sector. So, Minister, when will this happen?
Minister.
We have worked very closely with the retail sector, including the SRC, in the development of the retail strategy, and the publication of that will be forthcoming relatively soon, I would wish to assure the member. We do take a coherent approach. I outlined in my original answer much of the funding that we've put in place, but our policy coheres across a range of areas, and I would encourage the member, once it is published, to look carefully at the Town Centre Action Plan, again developed in partnership with COSLA. And I would also encourage a member to look closely at what we're doing with NPF 4, where there's an abundance of policies there which both reflect a review of the Town Centre Action Plan, incorporate it and put in place the long-term structures that we need in planning, matching what we're doing across a range of other areas to ensure that we do have a vibrant future for retail. Very final point I would make is just to acknowledge the point that Mr Lockhart made. There are long-standing structural challenges to the retail sector. Our job is to support retail to make a just transition.
Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister welcome, therefore, the inquiry which I understand the Economy Committee may be undertaking into town centre regeneration, and will be actually looking at Gala Shields in my constituency, where Energised Gala has worked very hard over the years with politicians across all parties to try to deal with the very thing that we've been discussing, which is the small shops that are disappearing, trampled over by the large supermarkets?
Minister.
I absolutely welcome the inquiry that the Economy Committee is undertaking, and I very much look forward to seeing the evidence that the committee takes and the recommendations that come out of its final report. And I'd be very happy to discuss this matter further with Christine Graham, including, if she would like, to invite me to her constituency to see some of these excellent local examples of retail which she's referred to.
Question number 4, Donald Cameron.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that Historic Environment Scotland is considering criteria that could be used to identify sites that could be left to managed decline.
Minister Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's important that Scotland's historic properties in care are kept in a safe condition, both for Historic Environment Scotland's staff and for public visitors. And we are seeing how these properties' natural processes of decay have been accelerated by climate change, and that this process is likely to continue. Historic Environment Scotland are currently considering what future management approaches and strategies will be needed for care in the long term, and I will keep discussing these potential approaches with them.
Donald Cameron.
HES stated recently that it may need to reduce physical access to some historic sites and accept the natural process of decay in some cases. Dun Carloway Broch on Lewis has been closed since 2019, with little progress made since, leaving local communities very worried about its future. So can the Minister confirm if HES is considering managed decline for this site, and more broadly, will he confirm what historic sites in Scotland HES consider to be most at risk?
Minister.
I thank Donald Cameron for his interest in this area, and I understand that Historic Environment Scotland's Director of Conservation has written directly to him about this, and are in the process of reaching out to Mr Cameron's office to arrange a site visit to Dun Carloway Broch with Historic Environment Scotland's experts. I can also confirm that Historic Environment Scotland carried out consolidation work on the Broch in October and November last year, and managed to get a section of the Upper Broch stabilised, which is good news, and further programmed works are planned for the end of this month, and HES will undertake a review at the end of April, which will inform the next steps and reopening timetables. The safety of the public must always be the primary concern. I hope that will assist Mr Cameron in terms of his local issues, but I'm happy to correspond further if that would be helpful.
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's not just reviewing sites, it's also ensuring that there's sufficient funding to make sure that those sites are able to remain open and be safe. And if I can say, as a resident of the city, just minutes away from us, we've got the Radical Road, which has been closed for a long time in Holyrood Park, and the problems of Duddingston Low Road. So it's not just reviewing, it's making sure that Historic Environment Scotland has enough resource to keep our fantastic cultural heritage alive and accessible to all of us wherever we live.
Thank Sarah Boyer for that question, and there's not a lot I can disagree with there, but the Scottish Government has given substantially increased resource to Historic Environment Scotland. 2020-2021, that was £80 million, 21-22, £75 million, and 22-23, over £70 million. So we're investing substantially, recognising the COVID challenges that Historic Environment Scotland have had in terms of their potential income streams, and we'll continue to work very closely with them on the important sites that we have across Scotland to make sure that we're protecting them as best we can from what we've already described as climate change, erosion and other challenges that they face.
Question number 5, Emma Roddick.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is tackling any issues related to high numbers of second homes in some parts of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
We recognise concentrations of second homes can affect community sustainability. Existing measures include the additional dwelling supplement that second home buyers pay, short-term let control areas for secondary letting, and also existing powers local authorities have to vary or remove council tax discount on second homes. In 2017-18, this meant council tax income generated from second homes contributed £21.2 million towards the provision of affordable homes across Scotland.
Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. She will be aware that I and many in the Highlands and Islands have deep concerns about how housing availability affects depopulation, and it's clear that, particularly in certain rural and island communities, second homes are contributing to this issue. Can she give an update on the SNP's manifesto commitment to give local authorities power to manage the number of second homes in their area?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I first of all welcome or recognise rather Emma Roddick's background of raising this issue in the Chamber, and it is an important issue. First of all, just to say that through the Housing to 2040 strategy, we are committed to providing more tools and powers to local authorities to support best use of existing housing stock. We're going to engage with stakeholders about proposals on what additional powers are needed during the stakeholder discussions on the Remote, Rural and Island Housing Action Plan. And the issue of a taxation review that she mentioned, we will be recommencing work on the taxation review this year. Work had been paused, obviously, due to COVID, but it will recommence this year.
Question number 6, Natalie Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it has made with the UK Government on the devolution of drug legislation to the Scottish Parliament, particularly in relation to the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971.
Minister Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has and will continue to engage with the UK Government to reform and/or devolve the Misuse of Drugs Act to fully enable an evidence-based public health approach to tackle the drug deaths crisis. The UK Government remain unwilling to either review legislation or devolve powers to Scotland. At a recent Parliamentary Joint Committee session on the 1st of February, Mr Malthouse refused to accept the recommendations of the Drug Death Task Force for legislative change. In the meantime, the Scottish Government will continue to seek solutions within current laws and our current powers to save and improve lives by reducing harm and promoting recovery.
Natalie Dawn.
Thank the Minister for that answer. It's going to take a national mission to end drug addiction and drug deaths in Scotland, and the Scottish Government are doing all within its devolved powers to tackle this. However, having the Misuse of Drugs Act still reserved to Westminster, we are tackling this issue with one hand tied behind our back. Does the Minister agree that this legislation should be devolved immediately so that Scotland has all the levers available to fully address this and save lives?
Minister.
Yes, I do very much believe that we need a root and branch review of the 50-year-old Misuse of Drugs Act and for the powers to be devolved to this Parliament. I should also say that I don't for a minute demur from the challenge of doing more with our existing powers and existing resources. That investment, tackling culture, reform and services are important, along with legislative powers and legislative reform. And certainly, if the Misuse of Drugs Act was reformed or devolved to Scotland, some of the work that we are currently immersed in and around drug checking facilities and drug consumption facilities would be far more easier. But the crux of the problem with the Misuse of Drugs Act is that it impedes that full public health approach to a public health emergency, and in particular it limits that full range of evidence-led harm reduction measures. I hope I have demonstrated to Chamber and beyond that I am fully committed to recovery, residential rehab, abstinence-based interventions, but we also need to get serious in this country about harm reduction and reach people where they are at any given time.
Thank you,
and
Minister.
that is in part what we need to do to reduce harm.
Question number 7, Richard Leonard.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the remediation, including removal and replacement of unsafe cladding on residential buildings in Scotland as part of its response to Grenfell.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Robertson.
We selected 25 high-priority residential blocks of flats for an initial phase to test and develop our free single building assessment. Surveys are ongoing and some reports will be finalised in the coming weeks. This will allow us to understand what actions need to be taken to further support affected homeowners and seek the most appropriate solutions. We will continue to urge other parties, such as developers, to continue to play their part where construction is found to be unsafe, and we are continuing to discuss with the UK Government what their plans are for the establishment of their announced £4 billion fund.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? But the Grenfell tragedy, which claimed 72 lives, was 4.5 years ago. We know that the Government has identified 25 high-rise buildings in Scotland affected, but it has not told Parliament where they are. We also know that since last year, the Government has had £97.1 million to spend in Barnett consequentials, but has not spent a penny of it. It will receive more funding, including a share of the £4 billion the Cabinet Secretary mentioned. When will the Cabinet Secretary move beyond assessments, inspections and so-called innovations, and for the sake of the safety and the very lives of residents, including the lives of children who live in these at-risk buildings, just get on with it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first of all say to Richard Leonard that the reason that the locations haven't been made public is because of the requests from those living in the buildings that they don't want that information made public. And I would have thought that Richard Leonard would respect the views of those who have asked for that information not to be made public. In terms of the £97.1 million, every penny of that would be spent, but he dismisses inspections and assessments. We don't know what remediation work is to be done until inspections and assessments of those buildings are done, and they are complex engineering work that requires specialist input into making sure that we know what that remediation is. And once that remediation, many of these buildings will be deemed safe once those inspections and assessments are done. But for those that require remediation work, yes, that £97.1 million will of course be spent, but we also need access to the £4 billion that the UK Government has talked about, and ourselves and my Welsh counterpart, Julie James, have just written to the Secretary of State calling for our governments to be part of any discussions with developers and its impact on our countries.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. We will now move to First Minister's questions. And at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. 1 week has passed since the unwarranted, unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and his forces. 1 week of watching refugees forced to flee their homes, watching cities being bombed, and a week of seeing young and old come together to fight on the front line in a war between two sovereign countries. And while we debate in this chamber, we cannot forget that the people of Ukraine continue to put up the most heroic defence of their country in the face of Russia's appalling actions. But they urgently need food, water, shelter and medical care. Today I'll stand with fellow party leaders to show our support for the Disasters Emergency Committee's Ukraine appeal. The people of Ukraine need our help in their time of need, and I would encourage everyone across Scotland who can donate to do so, and together we can help make a real difference to the peoples whose lives have been devastated by this atrocity. First Minister, can I ask, why did the Chief Executive of the Scottish National Investment Bank resign abruptly on Friday?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, can I also, on behalf, I'm sure, of all of us in this chamber and across the country, express my horror at the scenes we have watched unfold in Ukraine as a result of Putin's aggression and illegal invasion over this past week. And also express my admiration of and solidarity with the people of Ukraine, led, of course, by their President. All of them are showing incredible bravery as they stand up for the values of democracy and sovereignty and freedom. I also want to echo the comments made about the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal, which will launch just after this session of First Minister's questions, and all party leaders will stand together to support that. The Disasters Emergency Committee appeal brings together all of the leading aid agencies who are responding right now on the ground, and donating to its Ukrainian appeal is the fastest and the most efficient way to get money to charities who are helping right now. Of the £4 million announced by the Scottish Government on Monday for humanitarian aid, I can confirm to Parliament that £2 million of that will go to the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal. And before I move on to Douglas Ross's question, can I just take the opportunity to say to people that they can donate to this appeal at dec.org.uk or by telephoning 0370 60 60 900, or £10 can be donated by texting support to 70150. Every penny donated from Scotland will help to get much needed aid to the people of Ukraine who are fighting so hard for those values that we all hold dear. Presiding Officer, on the question about the Scottish National Investment Bank, I am sure that everyone across the chamber will understand that I am not going to go into the confidential details of anybody's employment situation here in the chamber. This issue is not a matter for Scottish Government ministers. It is a matter for the board of the Scottish National Investment Bank. Ministers had no input into that, although we were told earlier in February that the Chief Executive would be leaving the bank imminently. What is the responsibility of Scottish Government ministers to ensure is that the bank is performing well, and the bank is performing exceptionally well. It is perhaps the most important economic initiative that has been taken over the past few years in Scotland. And as of the end of January, the Scottish National Investment Bank had completed 13 investments, totalling just under £200 million since its launch, supporting companies across its three key missions of net zero, place-based development and innovation. The bank is doing incredibly well, and the Scottish Government, and I think all of Scotland, should continue to support it in those efforts.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister has used this opportunity to explain how well the bank is doing in the vital work they are undertaking, and therefore I think it is important that this Parliament knows and the public in Scotland know why the Chief Executive resigned so abruptly earlier this week. We've heard from the First Minister that she was given advance warning of that last month, and therefore I have to ask, why are we not finding out in this Parliament? This week, repeatedly, Scottish Conservative MSPs have asked why Aileen McTaggart, the Chief Executive, resigned. Not once did we get an answer, and again today the First Minister has refused. This bank will eventually be in charge of £2 billion of public money. Therefore, I think we are entitled to know about the leadership, because this secrecy and shutting down scrutiny is completely unacceptable. How can the First Minister and her government have nothing to say about why the person running that organisation has left? The ministerial code states, and I quote, "Information should not be withheld from the public unless there are clear and lawful reasons for doing so." Are there clear legal reasons for hiding this information from the public, or will the First Minister now tell us while the Chief Executive stood down?
First Minister.
I would have thought the answer to Douglas Ross's question about the terms of the Ministerial Code should have been obvious. The bank's Chief Executive is an employee of the Scottish National Investment Bank. The bank has a duty of care to all staff, including the former Chief Executive. That is why it is a matter for the board of the bank, and it is important for everyone, including Scottish ministers, to respect that confidentiality and that duty of care. What is important is that, given that the Chief Executive has resigned, and I think it is important to make this point that the bank has new interim leadership in place, and the bank continues to perform extremely well. I've already outlined the scale of the investments that are being made by the bank, supporting businesses all over the country to help us meet the missions of making Scotland a more innovative country, of completing our journey to net zero, and of ensuring place-based development to help some parts of the country have better, faster economic growth. So that's what matters to this Parliament, it's what matters to the Government, and at any given time it is vital to be clear that the bank has the leadership in place to ensure that continued progress.
Douglas Ross.
There's questions about the leadership of the bank that were not getting answered by the First Minister. She is telling us a lot about the bank and the importance to Scotland and Scotland's economy and to this Parliament, but like her ministers, is refusing to give any detail on why the Chief Executive resigned. And I think that is extremely unfortunate when we come to this Parliament to get answers from the First Minister and her government, because the timing about this is all very suspicious. The Chief Executive of Scotland's National Investment Bank resigns just days before the SNP launched their own economic strategy, a strategy that's wafer-thin, underwhelming and watered down by the Greens. It sums up a government that's out of ideas and out of any vision for creating Scottish jobs and growing our economy. This plan is more of the same. It even recycles productivity clubs from Derek Mackay's economic plan. And it's been criticised by business leaders, including Sir Tom Hunter, who described it as a long wish list with no magic wand. Is it really a coincidence that the Chief Executive of the Investment Bank has resigned instead of trying to deliver this new strategy?
First Minister.
Yes, it is a coincidence, and that is clear. But can I, on the issue of the former Chief Executive, the former Chief Executive of the Scottish National Investment Bank is a private individual. She has opted to resign her post as Chief Executive of the bank. She is entitled to the duty of care and the confidentiality that any other individual in her circumstances would be entitled to. And it would be completely wrong, and I think most reasonable people would accept, it would be completely wrong of me in the chamber of the Scottish Parliament to breach that confidentiality. What I have a duty to make sure about is that the bank has the right leadership in place and can continue to build on the excellent progress that the bank is making across its three missions. That, I think, is what is important. And in terms of the economic strategy published by Kate Forbes earlier this week, perhaps I just need to quote some people on the front line of Scotland's economy. So Tracy Black from CBI Scotland: business will welcome the ambitions set out as the right path for Scotland's future economy. Or Liz Cameron, Scottish Chambers of Commerce: businesses will applaud the scale and ambition set out in the strategy.
First Minister, sorry, if we could just ask you to pause for a moment. There's conversation going on across the aisles, and I'd be grateful if that could cease. First Minister.
Or Ewan MacDonald-Russell from the Scottish Retail Consortium: there is much in this strategy the retail industry can support. Andrew McRae, Federation of Small Businesses: the headline measures in this strategy could help Scotland realise its long-term ambitions. So that's what people out there working in Scotland's economy think. We'll continue to work with them as we continue to support recovery from COVID and make sure that the Scottish economy is living up to and fulfilling its enormous potential.
Douglas Ross.
I have to wonder when the First Minister reads out these quotes if they were similar supportive quotes when Derek Mackay issued many of the same points in his economic plan and previous economic plans, because the fact is this is a retread of many of the issues and ideas that were put forward by the SNP before. But the first part of the answer was quite telling from the First Minister, because she has confirmed to Parliament that there is no direct link between the Government's economic strategy launch and the resignation of the Chief Executive of Scotland's National Investment Bank. Therefore, she knows why the Chief Executive did resign. If she knows that's the reason why she did, that's not the reason why she resigned. And First Minister, we're just asking questions because we need answers, and it may be uncomfortable. And the groans from the SNP may be because they don't want these questions to be asked, but it is the job of opposition in this country to raise serious concerns when they come. But the First Minister also mentioned the economy. And for 15 years that her government's been in charge, Scotland's economy has been stuck. This government has created more problems than it's ever created jobs. We've seen one major failure after another, from Prestwick Airport to Ferguson Shipyard to BIFAB. And now, in this new strategy, the SNP are literally diagnosing problems that they themselves either created or made worse. And the First Minister can't even rely on support on the benches behind her, because in response to the launch of her government's economic strategy, Maggie Chapman, MSP, said the Scottish Greens believe the focus on growth is outdated. The focus on growth is outdated? These are the same Greens that Nicola Sturgeon personally invited into her government, a party whose policy is actually to make Scotland poorer. First Minister, is it any wonder that your government's economic plan is a shambles?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, based on today's performance by Douglas Ross, I predict that the one thing we will not be seeing any growth in the next few months or years is Scottish Conservatives' fortunes across the country. He wants to dismiss the views of CBI Scotland, of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, of the Scottish Retail Consortium, of the Federation of Small Businesses. I've set out their views on the economic strategy, and I would suspect that they perhaps speak for more people in terms of the Scottish economy than Douglas Ross does. Let's also look at the performance of the Scottish economy. Of course, we have a massive challenge ahead of us, as all countries do, to recover the economy from COVID. But look at the record over recent years. The Scottish economy outperforming the UK on productivity. We've seen a growth in the number of employers paying the accredited living wage. We saw our target to reduce youth unemployment met, although of course with the COVID challenge now we have established the Young Persons Guarantee. We've expanded modern apprenticeships. We've set out an infrastructure investment plan with over £26 billion of investments to drive a green recovery, create jobs, stimulate supply chains. Support for exporters has been delivered by this government in the face of Tory Brexit. Of course, Scotland is now the only part of the UK with a positive trade balance in goods. And of course, Scotland has been the top UK destination for foreign direct investment outside of London for every single one of the past 6 years. That's the record of this government on the economy, and we look forward now to building on that, working in partnership with businesses the length and breadth of the country.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, can I firstly join other party leaders in expressing our horror and heartbreak at the continually devastating scenes we see in Ukraine. And we unequivocally stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine in defence of democracy, of human rights and their peace and freedom. And we again recognise the unjustifiable and unprovoked attack from Vladimir Putin, and I would urge all governments across the world to do everything they can to put pressure on him and his regime. I also want to pay tribute to the countless number of individuals and organisations across our country who have been doing collections over the last week. Thank them for everything they're doing. We all feel frustrated. We all feel like we want to act. And one way we can act is by supporting the Disasters Emergency Committee's appeal on Ukraine. And the First Minister has already set out the details of how people can support that. They can go online to dec.org.uk and donate online, or they can text support to 70150. We will never forget the people of Ukraine and will continue to support them throughout this tragedy. Presiding Officer, last week, data from Public Health Scotland confirmed there are now over 680,000 people on an NHS waiting list. That is 1 in 8 Scots waiting for hospital appointments, diagnoses and procedures. This week, new workforce figures revealed there were over 6,600 vacant nursing and midwifery posts, the worst on record. The Royal College of Nursing report that staff feel they are asked to do more with less, and care is hugely undermined by the lack of staff. This is a dangerous mix, growing waiting lists and record staff shortages. First Minister, after 15 years, why have you still failed to deliver a credible workforce plan for our NHS?
First Minister.
Firstly, waiting times have increased over the course of the pandemic. They have increased because during COVID, the NHS has been able to see and treat fewer non-COVID patients. However, as we now hopefully come out of COVID and focusing on the NHS recovery plan, we want to get the NHS back onto a normal footing so that it can see patients more quickly and start to reduce those waiting times, and the Government is very focused on that. In terms of staffing, there are serious recruitment challenges for the NHS in Scotland, as there is indeed for health services across the UK. Of course, Scotland has, as a result of the actions taken by this Government since 2007, record staffing numbers in place, and the numbers I'm about to cite, Presiding Officer, are exclusive of vacancies. So these are staff actually in post. NHS staffing is up by 28,700 whole-time equivalents. That's a 22.6% increase since this Government took office. That takes it to a record high. NHS Scotland has higher staffing per head than we see in NHS England, 28.5 whole-time equivalents per 100,000 people here, compared to just 21.4 in England. Nursing midwifery staffing is also at a record high, up by 14.5% since this Government took office. So that's the action we have taken. Of course, the challenges we face now are even greater, and we're focused on meeting these, investing in the well-being of our staff, making sure that we don't lose staff from our National Health Service, that they are well supported, making sure that our Agenda for Change staff are the best paid anywhere in the UK, and of course working with NHS boards on recruitment campaigns, because one of the big challenges we face is a shortage of labour, exacerbated of course by Brexit. So we are focused on all of that in the NHS and of course across social care as well. So we'll continue to get on with the job of supporting our National Health Service as we go further into the recovery from COVID.
Anna Sarwar.
There were 450,000 people on an NHS waiting list before the pandemic. And the question is not if we have more staff, it's whether we have enough staff. And a failure to plan has consequences. If the First Minister doesn't want to listen to me, maybe she'll listen to one of those 680,000 patients. Ricky, a former miner. He has chronic spinal pain and needs regular spinal injections, but has been waiting 9 months. As a result of his condition, he needs neurological treatment. He's been told he needs to wait at least a year for an appointment with a neurosurgeon and at least 8 months to access an MRI scan. He is in so much pain that he's having to pay £300 per appointment with a private doctor. And things are now so bad, he is considering remortgaging his house to pay for the surgery he may need. First Minister, Ricky isn't alone. There are hundreds of thousands of people waiting for NHS treatment and struggling to cope. This undermines the very founding principles of our NHS. So, First Minister, warm words and quoting stats won't cut it. When will you wake up to the reality facing too many Scots?
First Minister.
I'm actually setting out the actions the Government has taken, because I don't believe Ricky's experience or the experience of anybody else waiting too long for NHS treatment is acceptable. I think people understand the immense challenges that have been faced by the NHS over the past 2 years. Anna Sarwar talks with some justification about the wider challenges in the NHS and the pre-pandemic progress. But the fact is, we were making progress in reducing waiting times before the pandemic. So we'd seen, for example, the numbers waiting over 12 weeks for outpatient appointments before the pandemic had fallen by 32%. The median wait for inpatient and day case treatment had fallen by 8.3%. That's the progress that was being made before the pandemic, and I think everybody understands the impact the pandemic has had. I don't believe there are sufficient staff in the NHS, which is why the SNP manifesto at the election this time last year committed to an additional 1,500 staff being recruited on top of the record number we already have in place, and we are working hard to ensure that we can meet those recruitment targets. So we are focused on the NHS recovery plan of building capacity in our NHS by 10% to help with that recovery process, and making sure that existing staff are well supported, that they are as well paid as we can deliver within our resources, and that we recruit more NHS staff. So that's what we are getting on with. And I think what people across the country on waiting lists, or anybody else for that matter, want to hear is what the Government is doing. And that is what I am setting out today, and will continue to set out, and indeed continue to be held to account for.
Anna Sarwar.
The actions aren't good enough, and they don't go far enough. Scottish Labour has modelled the Government's NHS recovery plan that the First Minister just referenced and backed up by independent analysis of that modelling. Even if you manage to deliver all the promised increases to activity, waiting lists will actually still continue to grow. In 4 years' time, by the end of the Government's recovery plan, there could be over 430,000 patients waiting for an outpatient appointment. That is 11,000 more than are waiting today. At the same time, and the same is true for inpatient procedures, under the Government's plan, as many as 153,000 people could be on a waiting list. That is 30,000 more than are waiting today. A catch-up plan surely means less people rather than more people on a waiting list. After 15 years of neglecting our NHS, is the best the First Minister has to offer a flawed recovery plan that will actually make waiting lists longer?
First Minister.
No, and I think Anas Sarwar's reference to Labour's modelling, and I'd be very interested to see the basis of that, perhaps shows his oversimplification of the plans that are in place, because building capacity is a key part of the NHS recovery plan, but it is not the only part. Also redesigning and modernising how people get care, making sure people are getting care as close to home as possible. Our investment recently, for example, in hospital at home, better for patients, better for the NHS. The redesign of urgent care programme, making sure that hospital stays legitimately and appropriately can be shorter, building up social care so that fewer people end up in the NHS because the services they need are not there in the social care sector. So the 10% increase in capacity, a really important plank of the recovery strategy, but I would suggest to Anas Sarwar that it is not the only part. So we're focused on finding the solutions. What was missing, and I appreciate he's in opposition and I'm in government, it's for the government to find solutions, but what was missing from all three of Anas Sarwar's questions there was a single suggestion beyond what we are doing already. We are taking the actions. We will continue to ensure that we are taking the proper actions to support our NHS into recovery so that patients like Ricky and the many others who are waiting too long for treatment right now get quicker treatment and that our NHS is on that sustainable basis for the future that we all want to see.
I'm going to move to supplementaries. I'd be really grateful for short and succinct questions and responses, and I call Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree that Scottish communities have demonstrated that they are fully prepared and willing to engage in a resettlement scheme for Ukrainians that matches the scale and severity of the current crisis? And will the Scottish Government continue to push the UK Government to urgently implement a more ambitious scheme to support those fleeing this appalling war on our continent?
First Minister.
Yes, I do, and I hope we will have unity across the chamber on that issue. Can I say, firstly, I support the actions that the UK Government has taken in the light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think the sanctions have been admirably tough. I think they can be tougher still, and I think the Prime Minister and the UK Government agree with that. I also recognise the movement that has been made on the issue of refugees over the past few days, but I think that can and needs, on a moral humanitarian basis, to go much further. The estimates already are that we're getting rapidly close to 1 million people already displaced from Ukraine as they are fleeing the horror that is unfolding there. We, in common with countries across the democratic world, have a moral humanitarian obligation to play our part in addressing that. So I would appeal to the UK Government again today, appeal directly to the Prime Minister to follow the example of the Republic of Ireland, to follow the example now of the whole European Union and allow anyone fleeing the horror in Ukraine entry to the UK if they wish, and let's deal with the paperwork later. Let's operate now first and foremost on the basis of that humanitarian obligation.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, Robert Habeck, the Economics Minister and member of the Green Party in Germany's ruling coalition, signalled that Germany will drop its opposition to German-based nuclear-generated energy. Now, if even the Greens in Germany see the sense in generating nuclear energy domestically, isn't it time for the Scottish Government to drop its ideological objection to Scottish-based nuclear generation in favour of a more informed scientific approach?
First Minister.
No, I think we should build our energy mix based on Scotland's assets and Scotland's priorities. So Germany, for example, doesn't have anywhere near the renewable potential that Scotland has, and for example offshore wind is a massive potential for Scotland. So let's continue to build our low-carbon renewable energy mix and do it in a way that is right for Scotland.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. Vladimir Lysin is one of the richest men in Russia, and he's been on the US Treasury Department's Putin list of known Kremlin associates since 2018. He's also the owner of a 3,000-acre estate here in Scotland at Aberystwyth. That estate has received just under £700,000 of agricultural subsidies between 2016 and 2019. Can I ask the First Minister if the Scottish Government will urgently review the agricultural payment system and any other relevant payment system to ensure that no member of the Russian elite, no Kremlin associate, is in receipt of public money here in Scotland?
First Minister.
Yes, I will ensure that that review happens. In fact, I can advise Parliament that I have sought urgent advice on the maximum possible action that the Scottish Government can take within our powers against individuals and entities identifying as having close links with the Russian regime, whether or not they are currently on the UK sanctions list. Options that will be examined include but are not limited to ending support from the public purse and freezing or seizing assets in Scotland where that is possible. And I, of course, will keep Parliament fully updated. I can also confirm to Parliament that the Scottish Government will today write an open letter to Scottish businesses and business organisations asking them to ensure, and it's of course a matter for businesses, but we will encourage them beyond direct investments, which we would hope businesses would divest themselves of, review operations for links and connections to Russia, however indirect, and then sever those links. And I can tell Parliament the Scottish Government and our economic agencies will not support trade and investment activity with Russia. We will, of course, support businesses as they adapt to remove any and all links with Russia.
Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Tuesday, Dawn Fresh Seafood went into administration. The immediate closure of the Uddingston factory has plunged 200 workers into redundancy. And they feel betrayed after years of broken promises. They fear they won't get their wages this week, with Alistair Salveson, one of Scotland's wealthiest men, claiming there are no funds to pay them. The Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union are working tirelessly to support their members, and some thankfully have found other work this week. But with a cost of living crisis biting, no one should be shortchanged at this present time. One angry worker told me last night there was no Christmas bonus, no support through COVID, not even a slice of fish. What urgent action is the government taking to support these workers? Because the men and women who helped to feed the nation during the pandemic should not be forced to use food banks.
First Minister.
I absolutely agree with the sentiments of that question and, like others, was very concerned to learn that Dawn French Holdings had entered administration, and I would absolutely call for the fairest possible treatment of workers of that company. Scottish Enterprise spoke with the administrators yesterday to better understand the situation and to provide whatever support it can to help the business and indeed to help the workers affected. We will work with the administrators to understand all potential options for the business going forward and explore all possibilities to rescue jobs. And, of course, the Government's partnership action for continuing employment PACE will offer any necessary support to the workforce that are affected and who may be facing redundancy.
Stephanie Callaghan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dawn Fresh is in my constituency in Uddingston Bells Hill, and as Ms Lennon referred to, they've entered administration this week, and that's despite concerted efforts by the Scottish Government, my own office, South Lanarkshire Council and Scottish Enterprise to support a takeover deal that would have maintained the Uddingston operation and continued to employ every worker there. So can I ask the Scottish Government what efforts will be made to revitalise those efforts to continue seafood production at Uddingston, and also what work will be going on locally to support those local workers who are really sadly facing redundancy currently?
First Minister.
Can I thank Stephanie Callaghan for that question, and can also take the opportunity to acknowledge how active she and her office have been on behalf of her constituents on this issue. Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government will explore and give support to the exploration of all possible options that might allow the business to continue in some form, and of course that might allow jobs to be saved and protected. And as I said, in my earlier answer, in parallel to that, we will provide as much support as possible to those workers who are affected and who might be facing a redundancy situation. And of course, the Business Minister would be happy to meet with Stephanie Callaghan and indeed with other MSPs who cover this area on a regional basis to keep them updated on these efforts.
Rachel Hamilton. Thank you, Presiding Officer. A concerned constituent contacted me following appalling overcrowding on the Borders Rail last Saturday. The 10:30 train from Tweed Bank was cancelled and the 11:30 train had just 2 carriages with standing room only from Galashiels. As a result, no fares were collected. Passengers were crammed in carriages with no social distancing and very limited mask wearing. The train couldn't pick up passengers on the route, bypassing stations. First Minister, this is absolutely unacceptable. Why hasn't the Scottish Government implemented the changes promised to Borders passenger services years ago?
First Minister. Obviously, the situation that has been narrated there does seem to be unacceptable. I'm not aware of the particular circumstances that led to this at the weekend, but I will ask ScotRail for an explanation and ask ScotRail what actions they are taking to avoid a repeat of that. And I will ask the Transport Minister to write to the member once we have that information.
Question number 3, Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether update on the Scottish Government's plans to replace carers' allowance with a devolved benefit.
First Minister.
We published a consultation on Monday setting out proposals for how Scottish Carers Assistance will improve support for more than 80,000 of Scotland's unpaid carers, and that is of course in recognition of their vital contribution. Our proposals have been developed with carers and support organisations, and the consultation is an opportunity for people to continue to shape this important benefit. It sets out how we will deliver an improved service, providing more stable support and also a new payment worth £520 a year for those caring for more than one person. And of course, this is in addition to the Young Carer Grant and the Carers Allowance Supplement. We're working with the Department for Work and Pensions right now to ensure that we can launch and deliver this new benefit as quickly as possible.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. During the pandemic, 1.1 million of our fellow Scots have become unpaid carers, and as a society we owe them so much. There is cross-party support across the Parliament for the extension of support for when the caring role ends due to bereavement, as well as support for when cared for people are in hospital or residential care. Can I ask the First Minister if she will commit for these potential reforms to be included in the next programme for government?
First Minister.
Yes, I mean, we have set out. The first thing we need to do, of course, is secure the safe and effective transition of this benefit so that people's payments continue. But of course, we've also set out views on priority changes we want to make to the benefit when it's possible to do so. For example, there are 5 of these: removing education restrictions so full-time students can get the benefit, allowing carers to add together hours spent caring for more than one person, increasing the time carers receive payments after the death of a cared-for person, making payments for longer when a cared-for person goes into hospital or care, and increasing the amount carers can earn and still get support. So we are taking views on these options, and I hope members across the Chamber, as well as people across the country, will respond to that so that we can build a system here that is fit for unpaid carers, because the contribution they make to our society is immense and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
We can take brief supplementaries. Eleanor Whittam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome that the Scottish Government is planning on delivering this new benefit in a caring and compassionate way in line with our ethos, and that the Scottish Government intends to make further improvements for carers. Can the First Minister confirm how much recipients in Scotland already receive compared to carers south of the border because of the Scottish Government's Carers Allowance Supplement?
First Minister.
Well, I think it's important that our social security system is based on dignity, respect and fairness, and that we deliver the maximum support to people who most need it. I think that has been shown with our Carers Allowance Supplement, which was the first benefit we introduced with new powers in 2018. Since then, around 126,000 carers have received payments. And last year, carers got just under £700 more than carers in the rest of the UK through the supplement. And of course, that included the extra payment in December to help with the impact of COVID. Those who have been receiving carers allowance continuously since 2018 will have received over £2,270 more than carers in the rest of the UK in the past 3 years. And of course, we have also introduced a young carer grant for younger carers. So that's a sign of what we can do when powers lie in this Parliament, which is why I want to see so many more powers come to this Parliament and not lie at Westminster.
I take a brief supplementary. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year, you doubled the Carers Allowance supplement to recognise the increased support that unpaid carers had to provide during the pandemic. Will you double it again this year and until you create the new Carers Allowance?
First Minister.
We'll consider all these things carefully. Of course, there were additional consequentials made available to us because of COVID, which are not being continued. So any moves to do that will mean that we have to take the money from elsewhere in our budget. But I think I've made very clear, and I think people across the Chamber are of this view, that the debt we owe to unpaid carers is so significant that we've got to consider very seriously everything we can possibly do to help them.
Question number 4, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of the steps being taken to return to normality after the COVID-19 pandemic, what extra help has been provided to support people's mental health?
First Minister.
Right throughout the pandemic, mental health has been at the forefront of our thinking. Our Transition and Recovery Plan, published in October 2020, backed by our £120 million Recovery and Renewal Fund, will transform services with a renewed focus on prevention and early intervention. Funding already allocated includes £40 million for child and adolescent mental health services, £21 million for grassroots community groups via Communities Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund for adults, and £5 million to increase capacity in the NHS 24 Mental Health Hub. Looking forward, we will continue to address the mental health harms caused by COVID. The updated strategic framework commits to ensuring that improving mental health and wellbeing is an underpinning principle as we take strategic decisions. Evidence on the likely effects on mental health will also be specifically assessed as part of our future decision-making.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the First Minister for that comprehensive answer. Last month, the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee I convene finished taking evidence on the health of our children and young people, and unsurprisingly, early intervention to prevent mental health issues becoming acute was mentioned frequently, and school counsellors were highlighted as a very positive move in that regard. I want to ask, what more has been done to improve early intervention opportunities for those who leave the supports of school or leave care? Still young people, but entering adulthood and potentially particularly vulnerable to the effects of the psychological stresses of the pandemic they've faced.
First Minister.
Well, can I firstly agree wholeheartedly that early intervention and prevention are central to supporting the mental health and well-being of children and young people. In addition to school counsellors that Gillian Martin has referred to, this year we've provided £15 million of funding to local authorities to deliver locally based mental health and wellbeing support for 5 to 24-year-olds in their communities. We've also funded the I Feel and Mind Your Time web resources, which provide information to young people on a range of mental health and wellbeing topics, because we know that providing young people with good opportunities when they do leave education or care has a significant impact on their health and wellbeing. We've also built this into the Young Persons Guarantee. We've provided up to £75 million to local employability partnerships via local authorities to provide employability support, including mental health support to young people aged 16 to 24.
Brief supplementary, Tess White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A report published today by the Mental Health Foundation highlights that mental ill health costs Scotland around £8.8 billion a year, while we know referrals for psychological and mental health services have now exceeded pre-pandemic levels. What action is the Scottish Government taking to improve mental health prevention and reduce the time spent on waiting lists?
First Minister.
I've set out already, in response to Gillian Martin, much of the action we are taking. We are focusing much more now on early intervention and prevention. That is the case particularly for CAMHS services, but also for adult services as well. And we are investing significantly in mental health services generally. Of course, I believe that governments have a duty, as far as governments possibly can, and this can't be done absolutely, is to remove some of the causes of mental health challenges for people, which right now will be being exacerbated by poverty and the cost of living crisis. So giving money to people who most need it, rather than, as some other governments are doing, taking away money from people who most need it, is an important part of supporting people to prevent mental health difficulties that come from the worry of wondering how that they're going to feed their children or provide in other ways. So that's an important part of the bigger picture here as well.
Question number 5, Stephen Kerr.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Information Commissioner's Office recently issuing a reprimand to it and NHS National Services Scotland in relation to the COVID-19 status app.
First Minister.
Throughout the pandemic, the Government's continually had to make tough decisions aimed at minimising transmission of the virus and helping to keep people safe and indeed alive. The NHS Scotland COVID status app is an important tool in our response to COVID and has played a vital public health role during the latter stages of the pandemic. We accept the outcome of the ICO's investigation and that the privacy information notice in the app could have been made clearer to users about how their information would be used. However, I must stress that at all times people's data was held securely and personal information was not compromised. Together with NHS National Services Scotland, we're working with the ICO to implement the improvements on transparency they have asked for and ensure that any necessary lessons are learned for future work.
Stephen Kerr.
So the First Minister was warned, but some might say, as usual, she thought she knew better than everyone else. And an apology to the people of Scotland is in order at very least. People trusted the Scottish Government with their personal data, but the ICO has had to reprimand the Scottish Government for misleading us about how that data would be used. This is a betrayal of trust. So why should the people now trust the Scottish Government?
First Minister.
Look, these are important issues, but I don't think anybody contributes to them by grossly overstating them or exaggerating them to the point of almost misrepresenting them in the way Stephen Kerr has done. Let me repeat for the reassurance of people listening to this who are actually interested in the substance. At all times, people's data was held securely and personal information was not compromised. What the ICO has said, and the reprimand, of course, at the lower end of the sanctions that the ICO has available to it, what they've said effectively is that the paperwork could have been clearer. We could have made it clearer to users in the privacy information notice about how their information would be used, and we accept that. But, you know, Presiding Officer, at a time when every single day governments everywhere were taking decisions to protect people from a potentially deadly virus, in this instance, yes, we could have made the paperwork slightly clearer. I accept that. But you know what? I think we're taking the right decisions to try to keep people in the country as safe as possible.
Question number 6, Emma Harper.
To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government plans to mark Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2022.
Earlier this week, the Minister for Mental Wellbeing and Social Care visited BEAT, the UK's Eating Disorder Charities Helpline Service, and took part in the members' business debate for Eating Disorder Awareness Week 2022. At this, he highlighted our work to implement recommendations made in the National Review of Eating Disorder Services, including the establishment of an implementation group and investment of £5 million to support the recommendations. We've also announced further funding of over £300,000 in 2022-23 for BEAT, and this will enable additional services to be rolled out across Scotland.
Emma Harper.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. On Tuesday, I led the members' debate on eating disorders awareness, and I highlighted that 1 in 50 people in Scotland are living with an eating disorder. So could the First Minister provide any additional information on work the Scottish Government is doing to improve the outcomes for people with an eating disorder? And will she join me in encouraging people who are worried about an eating disorder or who are living with an eating disorder to contact BEAT for help by calling 0808 801 0432 or by visiting BEAT's website?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I congratulate Emma Harper on leading the members' debate, and absolutely agree with her in terms of access to BEAT services, and she has very helpfully given the contact details. In terms of the action the Government is taking, building on what I said in my initial answer, the implementation group was established to take forward the recommendations made by the review. It most recently met last Friday to discuss progress so far and next steps, the implementation group has taken forward a comprehensive work plan focused on training and skills, quality standards and data improvement, and the Mental Wellbeing Minister is attending the group's next meeting to discuss areas where further improvements need to be made. And I would absolutely encourage anyone who feels they need support for disordered eating to seek help from friends and families, a medical professional or support services such as BEAT. And the additional funding I mentioned in my earlier answer for BEAT will allow additional services to be delivered, and these include expansion of helpline support, specific binge eating disorder support services and additional training for GPs and healthcare professionals.
Question 7, Paul O'Kane.
To ask the First Minister what urgent steps will be taken to address lung disease in Scotland in light of the reported comments of Asthma and Lung UK Scotland that the state of lung health in Scotland is shameful, with over 7,000 people dying a year.
First Minister.
Firstly, can I thank Asthma and Lung UK for their new Fighting for Breath strategy and for the very important work they do to support people with respiratory conditions. Respiratory disease is a Scottish Government clinical priority. We are committed to ensuring that people living with respiratory conditions receive the best possible care and treatment to enable them to live longer, healthier and independent lives. The first Respiratory Care Action Plan for Scotland was published last year. It sets out our priorities and commitments for driving improvement in the prevention, diagnosis, care, treatment and support of people living with these conditions. The plan also works alongside existing prevention strategies, including our air quality and tobacco strategies, which help to address the root causes of lung disease.
Paul O'Kane.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? And I know that she references the publication of the Respiratory Care Action Plan. Indeed, it's now 1 year since the publication of that plan. However, implementation of the plan has slowly progressed, indeed with the creation of the Scottish Respiratory Advisory Committee. On the issue of funding of the RCAP, no commitments have yet been made. Will the First Minister make clear how much funding will be allocated to the implementation of the RCAP in order to improve Scotland's lung health?
First Minister.
Well, I can confirm that we're working closely with the Scottish Respiratory Advisory Committee, and that includes Asthma and Lung UK, to develop an implementation programme that will help us understand the funding that is required to deliver on the plan's commitments and priorities. And we will make announcements about funding in due course as we do that work. The committee has identified 3 key priorities for year 1, which are firstly child to adult transition services, secondly pulmonary rehabilitation and thirdly data. We've also provided the Alliance with some funding to support the establishment of a lived experience respiratory network, and I know the Health Secretary will keep Parliament updated of further developments.
That concludes First Minister's questions. There will be a brief pause before members' business.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.